I know this is not your typical Thanksgiving sermon. Let's talk about the destruction of Edom. You're like, great, we're going to talk about a country we don't really even know much about, and then their destruction. But there's a lot, actually, that we can learn from this one chapter book. You guys probably look down at the bulletin. You're like, 1 to 14? How much are we reading? It's like, well, when there's only one chapter, you just have to list the verses. But in Obadiah verses 1 through 14, and goodness, now I'm flipping because I didn't have it bookmarked. You're going to be like, let's see if he knows where it is. And I kind of do. Put me on the spot. And he gets a bad rap. They have major prophets, and you have minor prophets. But don't be fooled. They're not called minor prophets because they play a minor role. All right? It's just because of the size of the book. And so in Obadiah, verses 1 through 14, this is more than a sibling rivalry. If you have siblings, you know everything's a competition, right? I mean, even things that aren't a competition become a competition, right? I opened the fridge faster. Like, okay, I got to my chair first. I fell asleep first. I stayed awake longer. Who wins when you're all having your own little competitions? However, in this passage, it's not just a sibling rivalry, a healthy competition between loved ones to always better each other, but a true rivalry, hatred of one brother and another. We actually learn that the reason why Edom is being humbled, why they're going to be destroyed, is because of the violence they had against their own relatives. And that the result of all, or the influence of all that, was actually their pride. So much of their pride and how vicious pride can be is actually shown in this passage. And you're like, where'd you get pride from? But we all hear of that verse before. Pride goes before a fall. And we say it all the time. And when we see pride blurring someone's eyes, ambition clouding their judgment, we can call it out and we see it. But a more rare occasion is when we can see it in our own lives, how deceitful pride can become. Last week I even kind of touched on it a little bit, but I really want to talk about it more. That this vision that Obadiah receives for the people of Edom, because of their pride, it brings them punishment, and it actually caused them to persecute their own brothers. It blinded their judgment. And why is this one chapter book being brought before you this morning? 1, it's God's Word. And 2, because I just want to talk about pride. And we have 2 weeks until Advent. So, yay. Like, do we have to? So I think today's message is actually very relevant. And there's 3 words that are actually spoken over the course of these first 14 verses. A word concerning pride. There's a word concerning punishment. And a word concerning persecution. Yay. So let's just jump right in. A word concerning pride. In these first 3 verses, to give a little bit of background, like you might not even know, who is Obadiah? Who is this man? Who is this prophet that we are learning from? Well, to begin, verse 1 starts out, this is the vision of Obadiah. He is a prophet. He has received a prophetic dream or a vision, if you will. And aside from his name meaning servant of Yahweh, we actually don't know anything else about him. So if you were really hoping to know more about who Obadiah is, I'm sorry. His history is as short as this chapter. Okay? Um, he is a servant of Yahweh. He is a prophet. We don't know a lot else about him. We know that this vision, historically, is taking place during the invasion of the Babylonian Empire. And we're going to learn that Edom helps them out. They help Israel to become exiled. And so in order to really understand the significance of these dueling nations, which is kind of fun, think about two nations dueling right now with Israel. Edom and Israel, yeah, it's exactly what you think it is. Today it would be Gaza and Israel. But here we have Edom and Israel. If you would recall, they're actually descendants of Esau and Isaac. All right? Sibling rivalry, if you will. Twin sons. And when they were still in the womb, you remember it was prophesied over them that the older would serve the younger. And that definitely played out when Esau gave over his birthright. I hope it was really good soup. I don't know. But your birthright, being an older sibling, that, even if it's not still a thing, I kind of want it to still be a thing. I like being the older brother. I would not sign over my birthright for a meal. But it was prophesied, right? The older shall serve the younger, and God's promises do not return void. So it had to happen some way. But this festered and grew. And you can imagine, on through the centuries, Esau's their great-granddaddy. And Isaac's ours. They're bad, we're not. And then same story on the other side. Well, Isaac's their granddaddy, and he took our father's birthright. That should be our land. And they're occupying it. Sound familiar? Well, here we are, still living the history of this covenant, this promise that God made, that the older would serve the younger. And so the Edomites, understandably, had ill will that they harbored against their younger brothers in Israel. And so I think this vision is really timely in their history. We know this is a vision of Obadiah. These are words concerning Edom. That's the rest of verse 1. Thus says the Lord God concerning Edom. All right, y'all, this is for you. It's interesting that a prophet of Israel is now speaking to Edom. And it's almost like I'm still talking to my people too, but I'm actually I'm giving them teaching and wisdom from the Lord by addressing you, sort of like an object lesson, if you will. And so he's preaching to the people of Edom. He tells them in these first two verses 2 and 3, of their pride and the deception that it can cause. Obadiah speaks. He says, "We have heard a report from the Lord, and a messenger has been sent among the nations. Rise up, let us rise against her for battle. Behold, I will make you small among the nations. You shall be utterly despised. The pride of your heart has deceived you. You who live in the clefts of the rock in your lofty dwelling, who say in your heart, who will bring me down to the ground?" The Lord is more than ready to answer that question. It's actually in Deuteronomy chapter 2, verses 4 and 5, that the Lord had assigned, believe it or not, a particular territory to Edom as its heritage. It was a modest size. It had modest significance. But instead of being grateful for the Lord's provision, they actually grew proud. They lived in the clefts of the rock. Edom was essentially situated in a mountain range, which is great if it's like your mountain range. No one's going to want to conquer you. You either have the high ground, and they're going to have to climb all the way up this mountain, and you're just going to, shoot down at them. And so the Lord is protecting them based off the land that he had given them. But what ended up happening, they took pride in where they lived. They literally thought that they were unassailable. And that's literally in the rhetorical question when he says, you live in your lofty dwelling, you say in your heart, who will bring me down to the ground? What a statement. There's a couple celebrities that have said similar things. Think of John Lennon from the Beatles, right? He got interviewed by American Magazine. He said, Christianity will end and it will disappear. I do not have to argue about that. I am certain. Jesus was okay, but his subjects were too simple. Today, we are more famous than him. And then after saying that he was more famous than Jesus, he got shot 6 times. Brutal. Just saying. Harland and Wolff, think about the architects of the Titanic. Remember that famous line when he got asked by a reporter, in his ironic tone, not even God can sink it. And we all know what happened. Interesting. This was really fun. Even Marilyn Monroe, she had been visited by Billy Graham during a presentation of one of his shows, and he said that the Spirit of God had sent him to preach to her. Well, that's really nice. But after hearing what he had to say, she said, I don't need your Jesus. Then a week later, she was found dead in her apartment after taking 42 Nembutal. I don't know if you know what that is. It's a narcotic. It's a sedative to help relieve insomnia. I just think an observation that if she had found Billy Graham's Jesus, she would have found true rest in Christ. Maybe she wouldn't have needed her medication. And then I think of us, that maybe we wouldn't curse God like John Lennon did, or they wouldn't turn their backs like you wouldn't turn your backs like Marilyn Monroe did, or Noah knew how to build a really big boat, and he didn't even say, God won't sink this. So why would Harland and Wolff? But I don't think their untimely deaths were simply coincidental. I don't believe in chance. I don't believe in luck. That's a formal statement. I'm on the record. I believe everything happens for a reason, for God's glory. But out of human pride, arrogance, we become flippant in our statements. We take for granted the blessings of God and what he has given to us. Or we think that it's because of our own works. I'm here because of me, what I've done. This is what I have to show for it. And I think we have so much to learn from the Edomites in these 3 verses. Goodness. They go on to talk about gloating, and we're going to touch on that. But, how many of us gloat over the downfall of others? Part of the illustration of Marilyn Monroe and John Lennon is one, hey, be careful what you say. Your pride will get in the way. Arrogance will get in the way of finding the Lord. And yet how easy it was for us to kind of be like, man, they said that? I would never. Oh gosh, serves them right. Can you believe what they said? What do they think? The Lord was just going to let them get away with it? How many of us have taken advantage of others' misfortune? As opposed to seeing a loved one or a friend who made a costly mistake and go, well, you know what? I'm going to be the favorite now. You know what? They're going to forget about my big blunder 2 years ago. because we're never going to let you live that one down. How many of us, out of pride, think we're beyond reproach? I'm untouchable. I'm not as bad as that person. You should see them. It's a better argument to be found in the Lord and to have His righteousness as our own than to be like, well, I'm less dirty than that guy. I'm still dirty, but I'm less dirty. The Lord wants us clean. I think that's the reason why grace is so amazing when we sing Amazing Grace, is because we're wretches. I don't know, when was the last time? Saved a wretch like me. That's not, positive reinforcement, is it? I'm a wretch. And so when we forget that, grace isn't that amazing anymore, is it? Is it grace when you earn it? No. That's why it's called grace. And so for Edom, when they forgot that their little mountain village was a gift from God, I think so too with us. If we do not check our pride, the little mountain villages that we have in our own lives, the clefts that we put up and the barriers we guard ourselves, thinking that we have it all together, when we know as soon as those walls are taken down, what's really left? Those little villages will be seen as more than what they really are. And I see what happens in these next 5 verses, verses 4 through 9, their punishment for forgetting who their brother was, forgetting who their Lord was, that they are now being punished. Galatians chapter 6, verse 7 says very clearly, do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatsoever man sows, that shall he also reap. In these verses, Edom is now reaping what they have sown. The Lord is promising to bring them down, the very thing they claimed would be impossible. Verse 4, though you soar aloft like an eagle, though your nest is set among the stars, from there I will bring you down, declares the Lord. And then verses 5 through 7, Obadiah kind of narrates the destruction that he sees in his vision. He understands that even though the punishment hasn't come yet, he's able to speak of it as if it's already been completed, because he knows the Lord and he keeps his promises. Total destruction is actually promised. Verses 5 through 6, if thieves came to you, if plunderers came by night, how you have been destroyed. Would they not steal only enough for themselves? If grape gatherers came to you, would they not leave gleanings? Essentially what the Lord is saying is that even thieves leave behind what they don't want. Grape gatherers leave gleanings. I hope no one has ever had someone break into their home. But they come after your TV, right? They go for your money and your jewelry. They don't care about the leftovers in the fridge, right? They're not trying to take the dog food. They still leave something behind. Though the Lord promises to leave them nothing behind. Verse 6, how Esau has been pillaged, his treasures sought out. And then the Lord's not just going to take everything from them. This is so blunt that he actually explains that their destruction is going to come at the hand of their allies. Verse 7, all your allies have driven you to your border. Those at peace with you have deceived you. They have prevailed against you. Those who eat your bread have set a trap beneath you. You have no understanding. Their allies at this time is the Babylonian Empire. It's not Israel. It's pagan people. It's not godly people. They have made friends with the enemies. And the Lord's saying, the people you've made peace with, the people that you have shared meals with, you broke bread, your bread, with them. They are the ones that are going to turn on you. They have set a trap beneath you. You have no understanding. And so I'm going to root out. I'm going to root out the problem that you have. 8 and 9. Will I not on that day, declares the Lord, destroy the wise men out of Edom, and understanding out of Mount Esau? And your mighty men shall be dismayed, O Teman, so that every man from Mount Esau will be cut off by slaughter. He promises. What are the things that people usually take pride in, right? What they know, or what they think they know. And so he promises to destroy the wise men of Edom. You have no understanding. He takes the understanding out of Mount Esau. And so not only did they allow their geographical advantage to go to their heads, but even their actual intellects. One of our founding fathers, Ben Franklin, he remarked in his autobiography that there's perhaps no one of our natural passions so hard to subdue as pride. You beat it down, stifle it, mortify it as much as one pleases, it is still alive. Even if I could conceive that I had completely overcome it, I should probably be proud of my humility. It is so vicious. Goodness. I think of the Edomites, I think of the pride that they had in their dwelling, the pride that they have in their intellects. I see why the Lord punished them where he did. Ben Franklin even understood that if we were to conquer our pride, we would become proud of our humility. I know many of people, I got to watch out for this too. They've made idols out of their education, their knowledge, their intelligence. But even more vicious is the hidden pride of the person who claims he doesn't need those things either. Look at that person that's so proud he went to college. Well, look at the person that's so proud he didn't. I've met people on the other side, they see themselves as wiser for having no wisdom, not needing intelligence to be an intellectual. A person is not wiser because they did or didn't go to college. A person is not less greedy just because they're poor. A person is not humble simply because he doesn't have what someone else does. In fact, pride is so destructive that the Lord not only sought to destroy it by slaughter. Every man from Mount Esau will be cut off by slaughter. But that people could be so prideful to believe they don't have any pride at all. A word concerning pride, a word concerning its punishment, and then a word concerning persecution. When you have pride in your life, or you know someone who has it, it's not just their lives that they affect. It shapes how they view things, how they live their life, and who they impact. And in these last 4 verses, verses 10 through 14, there's a word concerning persecution. We saw Edom's pride, their punishment, it's coming upon them. And that they receive their punishment, it's not just their pride, but actual violence against God's people. Verse 10 through 11, because of the violence done to your brother Jacob, shame shall cover you, and you shall be cut off forever. On the day that you stood aloof, on the day that strangers carried off his wealth, and foreigners entered his gates, and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were like one of them. Edom was complicit in acts of violence against their brothers in Judah. And it wasn't just as if they had sided with the Babylonians. When it says that they were standing aloof, it was actually as if they stood opposite of the Babylonians. They were on the side of Judah, prepared for battle, right next to their brothers, until it was time for them to turn. Could you imagine in the middle of it, you're seeing your friends dying left and right next to you, and to see the people that you trusted, your own brothers, are now stabbing you in the back from behind. I mean, you can imagine the betrayal that the people of Israel would have felt towards their brothers. You can imagine anyone hearing the words of Obadiah, even remembering that fearful, fateful day. I mean, the audience that is hearing this vision on Edom, they would have known exactly why Edom's being punished. They know full well. And if that wasn't enough, they did even more against their own family. Do not gloat over the day of your brother in the day of his misfortune. They did that. Do not rejoice over the people of Judah in the day of their ruin. They did that. Do not boast in the day of distress. Do not enter the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Do not gloat over his disaster in the day of his calamity. Do not loot his wealth in the day of his calamity. Do not stand at the crossroads to cut off his fugitives. Do not hand over his survivors in the day of distress. Do not. And it's repeated several times. In the day of his calamity. Folks, we all have had times in our lives when we're kicked, when we're already down. Whether it's life, family, job, usually a place where you least expect it. Words that were meant to be helpful, and they cut a little deep. I'm already down. And then you land this on me too. I mean, the Lord is displeased when his own people do this. How much more when his enemies, when the enemies of his people rejoice over their calamities. Second, Edom must enter the gate of God's people, meaning it was forbidden for them to enter and loot Jerusalem now. It's like, oh, okay, well, you're not allowed to touch a single thing of theirs ever again. Don't even come near it. Don't look at it. It is not for you. Enjoy your mountains. Even the third charge at the very end, verse 14. That when you cut down the Judeans who were trying to escape Babylonian invaders, when you delivered them over, if they were not killed by your own hand, you're never going to do that again. You were the ones that were supposed to help them out, where they never would have been in that situation in the first place. I think just like Julius Caesar, who asked the famous question, "You too, Brutus?" His half-brother. I think so those in Judah with the Edomites. You too. I think the betrayal by one's own brothers is despicable. And that even though the church should expect persecution, Obadiah reminds us to be unsurprised when we are betrayed and persecuted by even our own brothers and sisters. I know this little book packs a punch, doesn't it? We got the second part next week. I know there's still 15 through 21 left. We all heard and know of so many nations, institutions, political parties. They seem so closely aligned with the church's values, only to depart from them and then promote a moral agenda that's at odds with biblical Christianity. And so I kind of already asked, how is a book that only has one chapter relevant for our life today? I hope you already have a couple answers. Obadiah prepares you for the reality of betrayal, persecution, that we're not actually supposed to be surprised or give up to despair when these disappointments happen. Some things I want to leave you here with today, because there's a lot I could rant on about. First, you need to acknowledge that we are a post-resurrection church, right? We are after the resurrection and ascension of Jesus. We are a transformed Israel. To put it another way, the people of God in the Old Testament era, they were God's church also. They had been given the gospel, just like us in the New Testament era. But while we have a little bit more light being shed on the meaning of these things on through the ages and more of our responsibilities, there's still a connection between the Old and New Testaments. Obadiah is relevant for you today because pride still exists. Sin, in general, still exists. And so long as there are people that are fallen, living in a fallen world, we have to be ready for this, and especially by those who are closest to us. In fact, I think that's what makes the betrayal even harder, because the closer you are with someone, the farther you fall when that pedestal gets knocked over and that trust is broken. We see, secondly, that the prideful Edomites, they were threatened because they did not show consolation to God's people. They actually aided in their destruction. And so we can have hope even when we read passages like this, because we know and can be assured that however much we are made to suffer by our enemies, we will never be completely abandoned. That the Lord will bring judgment on those who mistreat us, the bride of Christ. And this applies equally to those who continue to show physical violence to God's people, and even those who harass us day in and day out. You know, when you really love the Lord, it's amazing how far someone telling you that Christianity is stupid will go. Maybe we've become calloused. If someone calls Christianity stupid, you should be bothered. I understand why you don't call them stupid back, but please don't stop being bothered. Sticks and stones may break your bones, and words will always hurt you. Oh gosh, words can be hurtful. But we have hope. I want each of you to walk away with this. If nothing, there's a lot to walk away with, but if nothing else, a reminder how devastating pride can be in your life. Don't become an Edomite, if you will, in this particular case. The Lord is not mocked. He holds the humble in high esteem. There's no room for arrogant people in heaven. Everyone there knows they don't deserve it. And everyone who thinks they do, well, there might be somewhere else. And then lastly, when we are persecuted by those who think they know better, those who are wiser than Christians, those who have that intellect, those who live in their mountain fortresses, those who don't need your Jesus, they don't need Christianity, they don't need God. we can take heart for the restoration that is given to us in Jesus Christ, and ultimately grants us victory to his people. Amen.